So as we listen, as you listen and I teach together, we should arouse this attitude of bodhicitta and think that in order to liberate all beings from suffering and establish them on the perfect state of enlightenment, I now will practice the listening to and contemplating and applying the teachings in the best way I can of this text of Shantideva's, the way of the Bodhisattva, the conduct, entering into the conduct of the Bodhisattva. And so with that, that altruistic, selfless, altruistic intention to benefit beings in the grandest way, which is to establish them on the path of liberation, then we ourselves must be become liberated, and through the power and the knowledge and the compassion of that state of being, we will definitely be able to benefit others in the best possible way, temporarily and ultimately. So we should all think like that, arouse that intention, that attitude. The text that we're studying is the Bodhicharyavatara, composed by Shantideva, and the text itself is considered to be a commentary, considered by some to be a commentary, particularly the way Patrul Rinpoche taught this text was as a commentary to the slogans, the verses. Supreme Bodhicitta is so very precious. Where it has not yet arisen, may it arise. Where it has arisen, may it not decline, but evermore grow and flourish. And those 4 lines sort of encapsulate the entire scope of this text. And right now we are in the first section of that, which is how to give rise to bodhicitta where it has not yet arisen. That is to say, in our own minds. And that process of arousing bodhicitta begins with the first chapter, which is to know why it is meaningful to be interested in bodhicitta, and why, being interested in bodhicitta, we should spend our time pursuing it. Our life is very precious. We shouldn't waste our time as people who know how to think fairly straight, logically, and abstractly, and maybe we have other ways of thinking too, but we should determine what we are going to spend our mind, what we are going to dedicate our mind towards by thinking it out. And so Shantideva outlines in the first chapter why bodhicitta is so worthy of our attention. That it's not just a good idea, it's not just something that makes sense, but there's a whole process that he presents in how to uproot our hesitation and doubt, and allow us to, or license us to give bodhicitta the attention that it affords. And then in the second and third chapters, Shantideva presents the basically it's a practice, and these second and third chapters have been used as a liturgy, culminating in taking the pledge of the bodhicitta. And so in these second and third chapters, we are introduced to the process of bringing clarity and purity to our minds and gathering the accumulations of merit, both of which are the key factors in whether or not bodhicitta will arise in our mind, whether it will arise and adhere to our mind. Our mind has to have the merit and the purity, the clarity. And so we, in some, from a historical point of view, these second and third chapters have sometimes, there's some versions of the Bodhicharyavatara, early versions, where the second and third chapters are one chapter. And so totally there's 9 chapters rather than the 10 chapters that we have. And so these 2 chapters, the third and the fourth chapter, definitely are connected in that way. So up to now, we have covered the first chapter, the first verses of the second chapter that give expression to making offerings as one of the best ways to accumulate merit. And of course, Shantideva was a renunciate. He was a homeless monk. And so he didn't have things like offerings. And so what he's conveying here is offerings that are mainly of a mind-made, mental offerings, using your imagination. Sometimes, I don't want to make a commentary about our modern psychology or modern education or something, but certainly imagination is not considered as powerful sometimes as logic. And so in Dharma, the mind is what the mind imagines, whether it imagines logic or it imagines illogic, whether it imagines flowers or whether it imagines the torturing hell realms or something. That's all how karma is created. If there's no mind, there is no karma. If we have a mind, then we are creating karma, and karma begins with that mind. It doesn't begin with our speech. It doesn't begin with our action, our conduct. And so making imaginary offerings is considered to be more meritorious, let's say, than making actual offerings, physical offering, material offerings, offerings that have a substance. Even if you are offering millions of dollars to millions of people, it would always be countable. And so the merit, likewise, is countable. It's bound. It's contained within a conceptual framework. Mind itself has no bounds. And you can imagine vast, endless, infinite offerings. And the merit is commensurately likewise infinite. And so these verses that we have gone over already are very helpful in using our imagination. Sometimes we don't know how to use our imagination often. Just like we don't really know how to make aspirations. We don't really know how to pray. These are kind of things that we're not really so sure of. So Shantideva is giving us a hint. This is how he did it. And so we can use his model, or him as a model, to develop our own imagination and make offerings. And as it says here in the commentary, it's not something that you do extensively, but you do it very sort of erratically or randomly throughout the day in short intervals, just thinking of the Buddha, thinking of offerings in this vast way. That's how to really practice in this way. And then moving along, then the verses that we just finished with were the praises and the verses of veneration that are also part of the sort of practices of accumulating merit, which included homage and prostrations. And then Shantideva includes the practice of taking refuge. And so the practice of refuge, starting on verse 26, where it says, until the essence of enlightenment is reached, I go for refuge to the Buddhas. Also, I take refuge in the Dharma and in all the hosts of bodhisattvas. Okay, refuge is a very vast subject, and the commentary also treats it very extensively. I'm going to try to essentialize it. I'm sure maybe you've heard many teachings on refuge, and maybe I'm cheating you out of more teachings that will only contribute to reinforcing your understanding of refuge. But we do have we're on the second chapter, and there's 10 chapters and so forth. So I would like to touch on refuge and then move on. Refuge is the door. Taking refuge, okay, taking refuge is the door to all the teachings of the Buddha. All Buddhist teachings begin with taking refuge. All vows, such as the Bodhisattva vow, all Vajrayana Samaya vows, and so forth, all Pratimoksha vows of personal liberation, the vows of monks and nuns and so forth, lay practitioners, all of these things are all grounded on the vow of refuge. All Buddhist practice is founded on refuge. According to the teachings of refuge, if your practice if you are not someone who has refuge, that is to say, you haven't taken the vow of refuge, then even if you practice teachings that are nominatively from the Buddhist tradition, there won't be much benefit. Many of us, have studied and been introduced to many different spiritual traditions, religions and spiritual traditions, or what have you. And there is this sort of interest or almost insistence that we understand all religions as being equal. And of course, Buddhism doesn't consider itself to be a religion. It's just Buddhism is just the way things are, and presents methods to discover the way things are. There's nothing newly introduced that we need to fulfill or accomplish. And even according to the teachings here, even the great scholars of Nalanda, many didn't see the difference between the Buddhist methods and the Brahmanical or let's say the Hindu methods. And certainly those of us who have looked at Hinduism and Buddhism think that, well, they're very similar. But according to Buddhism, and even Atisha complained that Indians had lost, or where he was, that the pundits were starting to lose the distinction between Buddhist practice and Hindu practice or Brahmanical practice. But on the surface, superficially, they look the same, just like we could think of all religions kind of looking the same. Nobody's going to argue that they don't regard kindness and love and compassion as being central to their catechism. But the difference between Buddhism and others is refuge. That's why when Atisha went to Tibet, that was his main contribution, his main teaching was refuge, so that he became known as the refuge Lama. Even though those people that said that he was like a refuge Lama, it was kind of a disparaging remark, as if he didn't know anything else about Buddhism except refuge. So they called him, he's the refuge pundit or the refuge Lama. And he thought that was just a glorious title to have, and that if he could contribute to Buddhism at all by being known as the refuge Lama, then even someone who heard just his name as refuge Lama would benefit. So that's how important it is. And that is what makes things the distinction. Even in the Tibetan language, I don't know in Sanskrit or what, but in Tibetan, a Buddhist is called someone who's on the inside Dharma, and then a non-Buddhist is outside Dharma. Now, sometimes this inner and outer can be thought of as people who deal with things internally, that is to say mentally, invisibly, and those that deal with things externally. But really it has to do with, or it indicates whether someone is within the Buddhist approach or not within or outside the Buddhist approach. That is to say, Dharma. Someone who has taken refuge then is tapping in to the source of all the qualities that come from the practices of the Dharma. In this case, and again, there's so many ways to approach the teachings of refuge. There's many different classifications distinctions, categories, outer, inner, secret, according to the Hinayana, according to the Mahayana, according to Vajrayana, many different ways. Refuge as causation, the fruition refuge, causation refuge, many different ways. Generally, here, Shantideva, the language of the formula here that's in verse 26 that we just recited is from the point of view of Mahayana. And the distinction in the Mahayana way of taking refuge, of course, is the motivation. And so, as it says here, until the essence of enlightenment is reached, that is to say, in order to establish all beings on the level of enlightenment, from now until the essence of enlightenment is reached, I take refuge I go for refuge to the Buddhas. The Buddhas here meaning the embodiment of the three kayas, the Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, Nirmanakaya, or the four kayas of the kaya of the essence of being, the fourth kaya. So that is what is meant here by the Buddha. The Buddha on an outer level, of course, the Buddha means the teacher. We say, the unsurpassable teacher is the precious Buddha. Unsurpassable protection is the precious sacred Dharma. So when we take refuge in the Dharma, we take refuge in true Dharma in its two aspects. One is in the words of the Buddha, the teachings, the statements of the Buddha, the advice of the Buddha. Which is quite extensive. And then secondly, the second aspect of the Dharma is the Dharma of the realization of those teachings. And then in the host of all the Bodhisattvas, who are the noble Sangha, the Sangha. So when here in the Mahayana, when we talk of the three jewels of the Buddha Dharma Sangha, then we mean the Buddha as the embodiment of the three kayas, the Dharma in its two aspects of transmission and realization, and the Sangha in its aspect of the noble Sangha, all the hosts of Bodhisattvas. What is refuge? What does it mean to go for refuge or to take refuge in? It means that three things. Of course, when we take refuge, the implication is that there's something to worry about. There's something that we're afraid of. And you take refuge from that. And then what we're afraid of, also there's many different levels of fear that drives us to taking refuge. On the basic Hinayana level, since before we were like a child and didn't understand anything about life, then we learned that there is such a thing as karma, there's impermanence, there are the sufferings of samsara, the sufferings of life. And so we become afraid of the future, afraid of our karma that has not yet ripened. And we're afraid of the experiences we'll have in the future based on our understanding of karma and the endlessness of conditioned existence, especially when we see how our own minds have been so conditioned, and the lack of freedom that has given us. We get worried and have fear for the future. And then we take refuge in the three jewels for protection from that. I say the Dharma is the unsurpassable protection is the precious sacred Dharma. That's why we say it's taught here that for beginners like us, then the real source of refuge, almost like the ultimate refuge for us, is the Dharma. It's the Dharma that will be what will actually help us. It's the Dharma that is what we will actually connect with. The Buddha, not so much. Now, bodhisattvas, noble sangha, maybe not so much. But it's the Dharma that we principally, it's called the protection, it's the refuge of beginners. Because that's how one begins to be protected from the suffering that will occur based on our ordinary conditioned mind. Because when we begin to integrate or merge the Dharma into our minds, to pound it into our minds, our karma begins to change, and the conditions that are a projection of our karma also begin to change. We begin to have confidence. We begin to cheer up, see that our future is really in our own hands, in our own minds. And so the Dharma is the kind of the real source of refuge we should pay most attention to at this point. Dharma, or a refuge. So it's like if you are refuge means acceptance. It means commitment, and it means resolution or resolve. So refuge isn't like a prayer or a supplication or an aspiration. We should make a distinction between these things. Like a supplication is a supplication is like a prayer to be protected. Please, three jewels, protect me. Or protect beings. That's what a supplication is. Aspiration is like when we say, may all beings be happy. May all beings be protected from suffering. May they be free from suffering. They say a supplication, it's like a bakshish, which is like a bribe. Like it's the attitude you have when you make, I'm giving you this, now excuse me from my penalty. Taking refuge means acceptance, commitment, and resolve. If you were in a storm, like in a snowstorm, you couldn't see in front of you, you know that you're your time is getting short, when you'll be able to keep going, and frostbite and all these things. And you think you see off in the side like what could look like a hut, say a shelter. And so by examining it, using your memory and your logic, you determine after really looking at it that, well, it's way over there, but it's worth my effort to seek that refuge because of what I know about it. I understand by my calculations that it will protect me from this storm. Then you make a commitment to go. You don't just stand there with confidence that it's there. You have to go. And so there's acceptance of it, and then there's the going, the commitment. I must get there. I will get there. I promise I will get there. I promise myself that I will put forth my effort to go there. So you turn that acceptance into a commitment, and then you resolve to pursue it, and you step out and go until you get there. You go until you get there. So that's taking refuge. So you should understand kind of the distinctions between supplications, aspirations, and going for refuge or taking refuge. Basically, all taking refuge in the Dharma is being concerned with or learning, contemplating, and meditating on knowledge and compassion. So that's what we are focusing on. That's our acceptance of knowledge and compassion as being worthy of our effort. By analyzing that and by making a commitment to knowledge and compassion and resolving to accomplish knowledge and compassion and having that certainty of that resolve carry us through until, what does it say? Until the essence of enlightenment is reached. Traditionally, the development of refuge comes through the presence in our minds of faith. And faith arises in the wake of, faith arises as the result of contemplating, understanding precious human birth, impermanence, cause and effect, causation, and the unsatisfactory nature of samsara, the problematic nature of being conditioned. So when the more as we develop a greater and greater understanding of those things, of those topics, or of those windows to our life, that's really what those contemplations are. They're just 4 different windows into the same life that we live. There arises faith as we turn our attention away from what perpetuates our conditioning towards being free of our conditioning. And that sort of intermediate area is called the development of faith. And of course, faith is not blind faith. Blind faith is not considered to be so much. One kind of faith, there's 4 kinds of faith. The faith that is kind of recommended, or the faith that we should strive towards in order to genuinely take refuge in the 3 jewels, is called irreversible faith. One kind of faith that we may have our own experience of is called Dongwe Depa, means clear faith, or literally clear faith. But what it means is there's something that strikes us as amazing. You could say amazing faith. And the source of that faith has to do with our karma of our previous lives, where we see an image of the Buddha, say, or some representation, a stupa, or we hear of some slogans or some quotes of the Buddha, or if we happen to get dragged to some teaching by somebody and we hear some teachings that strike us and almost makes us cry for no reason, can't help it. Or you are very moved by some noble Sangha person, that kind of something where you're just struck. It's not something you did yourself, basically, but it had to do with something that you did or some relationship you had in the past with the Dharma. It's called amazement faith. And that can also just be a sort of a weekend experience also. It has no stability or lasting power all of its own. We need to then discover that there is a way to practice, to achieve that which struck you as being meaningful. And so this eager faith is called eager faith, or desires faith, or yearning faith. You have a great eagerness for practicing in order to achieve what's meaningful. And through that eager faith, through engaging in the stages of practice, the contemplations, the study, the learning, remembering, the mindfulness of the teachings, and meditating, or whatever your practice turns out to be, then through that engagement with the practice, there develops a certainty. That faith is called a certainty faith. And so it's a faith, this certainty brings about a greater sense of commitment. You have a sense that there is some achievement accomplishable. Your eagerness and your practice has given you a vision. Kind of the eye of knowledge has been opened, and you have both you're working out your own salvation, and you are also seeing how it can be actually brought to perfection. And so this confident faith, or this certain faith, develops that clears away all your doubt or clears away, like say, doubt, it also is impermanent. It can be lost. So far, all these faiths can be lost. The fourth one is called Irreversible Faith. And so if we continue in our certainty of that removes doubts, our practice, if we continue in our mindfulness and contemplations and meditations and study, then our doubts more and more are removed and our faith becomes irreversible. And an irreversible faith indicates that there are no doubts remaining. And when there's no doubts, there's no obstacles. There has been some capturing, we could say, of the view, the deep view of, particularly here we're talking about the Mahayana. And so this is the fuel for your, this is the how you pass through the threshold of going for refuge. Again, the important thing I'll repeat, is this acceptance. Acceptance also means kind of a surrendering. Just surrendering to the three jewels, to the Buddha as the teacher, to the Buddha as the goal. The Buddha is the expression of awakened mind. It's more of a more inner level. On the outward level, it's the teacher. And the Dharma is the teachings. On the inner level, the Buddha is the goal, and the Dharma is the path. And the Sangha are always those who support and encourage our path. Become a model to us and an object that we can model for. But here, of course, Shantideva is talking about the hosts of bodhisattvas. So that's the noble Sangha. So there's this sense of surrendering. There's a sense of pledging, and this sense of commitment or resolve or certainty. So that's what refuge means. We use our speech faculties to say refuge kind of formulas, but they shouldn't be thought of as supplications or aspirations. We should use those formulas with that idea of making a commitment, accepting the Buddha as the guru, as the teacher, as the goal. And if we accept the guru, the Buddha as the perfect teacher, the unsurpassable teacher, that means that everything the Buddha says has to be true. And so we take refuge in the Dharma. We can't take refuge in the Buddha and then pick and choose about what Dharma we agree with and what Dharma we don't agree with. That doesn't make sense. That's illogical. If we accept the Buddha as the perfect teacher, if we accept the Buddha as the unsurpassable teacher, as the expression of enlightenment, then what comes from the Buddha is the Dharma, is the truth. And so then we always look to our own shortcomings, our own inability to grasp the intention of what the Buddha is teaching. rather than criticizing or denying or being negative about the Dharma.
84,000.
The Buddha taught, even in one text, it talks about how every sentient being, there is a Dharma for them. When the Buddha taught, the Buddha is teaching and anyway, there's many different ways of discussing this. I don't want to take up the whole evening, especially since I forgot my watch. Anyway, I think the key point is to know what you're taking refuge in, which is the three jewels and all of their qualities. Who's taking refuge? And here we're talking about in the Mahayana approach, then who's taking refuge in is myself and all sentient beings. And for how long are we taking refuge? And according to the Hinayana, you take refuge for the rest of your life. It's a life commitment. In the Mahayana, we take a commitment to take refuge in the three jewels until the essence of enlightenment is reached, until I reach the very heart of awakening, myself. And we that means that we're not taking refuge forever. We won't diminish refuge into just some sense of, I'll just do this forever. But that there is a point where we no longer take refuge. That is when we merge, or when our own Buddha, our own inner Buddha is revealed fully, then that individual becomes a refuge that others can take refuge in. So that's the time. So the object, what we take refuge in, who takes refuge, the time we take refuge, why we take refuge. That's all the teachings on the four thoughts that turn the mind. And we take refuge out of compassion for sentient beings who have no refuge. We bring them with us as if we were their tour guide or tour organizer. We bring all the unruly ones and all the ones, all our parent, mother beings with us. That's who takes refuge. And how you take refuge is with compassion for all those beings, and you take refuge with their body, speech, and mind. So we do need something to say. And here what Shantideva is giving us, until the essence of enlightenment is reached, I go for refuge to the Buddhas. Also I take refuge in the Dharma and all the hosts of Bodhisattvas. Those verses have become a well-used formula, so to speak, of reciting the prayers of refuge. So there's many things to know regarding verse 26 here. And so I'll leave it at that. It is a vow, before I leave it. It is a vow. You pledge to attain enlightenment. And you do so out of compassion for beings And the more you study and learn the qualities of the three jewels, the qualities of particularly the Buddha, and we practice the Dharma, that's kind of more accessible to us. But Buddha is not, we don't have, in Buddhism, there's no like mysteries in that sense. The things we're not supposed to talk about because nobody really knows, because it's unknowable. Buddhism is not like that at all. We have to know the qualities of enlightenment. We're pledging ourselves to attain it. We should know what the qualities of the Buddha are. The knowledge. What kinds of knowledge is the awakened mind endowed with? What kind of compassion is the awakened mind endowed with? What kind of power does the awakened mind have? We should know those things. So you can, and those things are very accessible in the manuals, the meditation manuals that deal with the topic of refuge, like the Jewel Ornament of Liberation, Words of My Perfect Teacher, and the Treasury of Precious Qualities, the Jigme Lingpa's commentaries, and others. So, but these are just some essential points to bring up here. Then the next verse, to perfect Buddhas and to Bodhisattvas in all directions where they may reside, to them who are the sovereigns of great mercy, I press my palms together, praying thus. Okay, now Shantideva is launching into the confessional practice, the practice of confession. And he is invoking, visualizing and invoking the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the space in front. It says in all directions. So you're completely surrounded by Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And they extend as far as space extends. And to them who are the sovereigns of great mercy, that is to say, those Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are the very presence, the very embodiment of compassion. Then to them, I physically put my hands together and entreat them and pray and make this confession to them. Now, we should also understand that when we talk about confession in Buddhism, and here we're talking about, it's going to go on for several pages. So we should know that confession is one word, and usually I believe, when we say confession, usually we mean confessing something, like it's like we utter a confession, we speak a confession, we make confession. But here, confession isn't that. The word confession here is a process of leaving aside something that's undesirable. It's like parking it, or leaving it aside, or putting it down. Shakpa, the Tibetan word for what's been translated, and it's just kind of universally accepted pretty much as confession. The word itself means to put aside. And so what's recognized here is through, well, of course, Shantideva goes into great lengths here. Okay, here we'll take the next, maybe the next verse begins, because it's in quotes, if you'll notice. It says, "In this and all my other lives," that is to say, in all my previous lives, while turning in the round without beginning, that is to say, in samsara, which means that as long as my mind has been conditioned, which means while turning around and round without beginning, means for as long as my mind has been conditioned, blindly I've brought forth evil and incited others to commit the same. So blindly here indicating that through the power of ignorance, I have acted in ways that have been negative, harmful to me or to others. And I did that because I didn't know what I should avoid and what direction I should go, what to accept. I was led by not only not knowing the distinction between what would be beneficial and what would be harmful, but I was also driven by my attachment, my desire, my aversion, my prejudice, my fear, my doubt, my pride, my envy, my jealousy, all these things which at the moment seemed very proper and one-pointed. But now my perspective is that, wow, I've been utterly confused since beginning was time. And we don't get sort of a pass for being ignorant, like an excuse. That's not how karma works. Nobody gets an excuse. We're alone in samsara. And everything is our creation. And it's all driven by my conduct, my mental, verbal, and physical behavior. And now, having studied the Dharma, studied precious human birth, that gives me some distance from my experience, some chance, some opportunity to be creative with my mind and how it functions. A little bit of perspective. I develop a perspective that's been reinforced by seeing the preciousness of the freedoms and advantages I have, and how everything is impermanent. My karma is impermanent. My kleshas are impermanent. My hatred is impermanent. My attachments are impermanent. My suffering is impermanent. And so now when I look back, I see a lot of negative action that now I will call forth and feel regret for. And in the context of someone who's taken refuge with the background of understanding the way that conditioned existence functions, how samsara functions through the lens of the four contemplations, for instance, the Four Noble Truths. Then from that, within that context, regret and remorse for negative actions becomes a power. It becomes one of the powers that can antidote and purify karma. It purifies it by changing the conditions for those seeds to ripen. Which is what Dharma does. And when it says here, blindly I've brought forth evil, what's being referred to here as the 10 particularly the groups of actions that fall under generally the general categories of body, speech, and mind, specifically killing, taking what's not given, and sexual misconduct that are in the realm of our physical actions, and then the speech, that the four negative actions, non-virtuous actions of speech, which is divisive speech and harsh speech and deceptive lying speech and useless gossip, telling tales speech. All these are general collections of actions that are speech, executed by speech. Of course, there are also the chemistry of physical and verbal actions are also how the seeds are planted and how the effects of those seeds are experienced is driven by or tempered by the motivation, the stupidity, the desire, the aversion, how that has driven those, motivated those actions, what the motivation was. Killing out of hatred and killing to protect. The negative action of killing is the same, but the effect will be different because the motivation was different. And then in my mental actions, negative actions are hatred, what it's called, wishing harm, hatred, and envy, and wrong views. Wrong views refers to not believing in karma, not accepting that there's a connection between causes and their results. And that there is basically, you could say that wrong views would be belief that and what's it called? Everything ends when you die. Nihilism. Or that things are permanent. Eternalism. These ideas. We can even say, some places it even talks of, in the realm of permanence and nihilism, as past and future lives might be considered by some, in some places, to be wrong views. That's another topic we can discuss some other time, maybe. How important is it to have that, to take past and future lives as a truth or as right views? But basically, any kind of negative attitude is wrong view, is mentally negative. Is a negative attitude is a mental bad karma. All the evil I, a sinner, have. Wait a minute. Oh, okay, no. Where am I here? 29. Oh, okay, we did 29, right? And deceived and overmastered by my ignorance, again, by my ignorance of karma, principally, I have taken pleasure in such sin. I've rejoiced in this, when other people have done things. And seeing now the blame of it, in other words, recognizing this as a fault. Before, I didn't think it was a fault. Like, yeah, that's what our side does, So now I'm all alone with my karma, and I see that I'm the only one who's going to experience the results of my negative physical, verbal, and mental actions. So now I see a fault as a fault. And oh, great protectors, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, I confess it earnestly from the bottom of my heart. I confess it. I expose it and feel remorse about it and vow to refrain from it going forward. Then 30, and so then now in particular, that's all in general, the general idea there. And this again is principally using the power of regret or remorse, which cancels. Regret cancels. Remorse cancels. It's a canceller. If you do something very kind to someone and you regret it, you cancel the karma. You antidote the positive karma of that, the merit of that generosity. That's why we're always said you should practice generosity within the scope of your what's it called? Your lot, your lot in life. You shouldn't go beyond so that you don't want to give so that you'll feel regret. You might feel regret that you didn't give enough, or you might feel regret that you gave too much. So regret is a power, and here we're talking about regret as a power to purify. So the process of regret is very messy and is kind of uncomfortable to hear all these things. Very uncomfortable. But it's just like washing a greasy, dirty rag or a greasy, dirty pair of pants. It's messy, but the product is clean. And you have to do that. If you just walk around thinking that you're clean, basically you're just embarrassing yourself. But here, in your attire, from the attire, wearing your clothes point of view. But here, we're just deceiving ourselves. So we have to go through this process of regret. And since we're so darn, we've got so much darn pride, and we're so arrogant and conceited and so well educated and so smart that it's really hard for us to think and to admit that we've been fundamentally mistaken in how we approach using our body, speech, and mind. 30 then in particular, 30 goes into the particulars here. Whatever I've done against the triple gem, which are the objects of excellence. The triple gem has all these noble qualities, and we've done things against them. We've rejected, we've ignored, and so forth. And against my parents, who are those who gave us benefit. Our mother gave us our bodies. That's one benefit that we still have. We can still practice Dharma because of the body that our mother gave us. And we've had teachers, the preschool, ABCs, math, all the things, all our teachers who benefited us, and the rest, and our spiritual teachers, who are especially those that are kind of heavy with qualities, heavy with kind of awesome teachers that we've talked bad about behind their back, and so forth. And so the karma of that is very, very negative, very powerful karma. This is the kind of karma when we act against the triple gem or against these heavy teachers that block us from spiritual practice in the future, coming into making connections, meaningful connections with the teachers in the future. So we're giving rise to our mistakes, and then through the force of my defilements, my ignorance, my attachment, my aversion, principally those three poisons of the mind, then my body, and my speech, and my mind, what we just talked about, then all the evil I, a sinner, have committed, all the wicked deeds that cling to me. So karma is like, I always say, it's like rust on iron. Our karma is kind of becomes part of us, but not us. It's very stubborn, and it clings to us like that, almost like a shadow clings to our body. It can run and run and run, but we can never avoid our shadow. So all the wicked deeds that cling to me in that way, the frightful things that I contrived, I openly declare to you, the teachers of the world. So now we're envisioning that we are in the presence of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And since the Buddhas are all-knowing, they already know. So we really shouldn't feel like we need to conceal anything from the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. The benefit here is to openly declare, to be completely open, to shine the light in all the corners of our memory, our consciousness, and to declare fully, and quickly, swiftly, before death. Why should we do that in this fashion? Then he says next, it may be that my death will come to me before my evil has been cleansed. So now I've got all the necessary, I've got all the equipment, I've got the freedom, I've got the endowments, I've got the advantages. My life might be one of struggle. There might be lots of conflict. I might be in the middle of a pandemic. But I can still practice Dharma. I still have freedom from states that would completely prevent me from hearing the Dharma, understanding it, practicing it. I'm free from those conditions. The Dharma is all around me. Now I have the advantage of being in a time of the Dharma. And I've got support. I've got Zoom. I've got Sangha. I've got teachings. I can read. I've got all these advantages. And these are all we need. We don't practice Dharma and try to get a perfect life so that we can practice Dharma as the central figure of a perfect life. That's not how Buddha attained enlightenment. That's not how the great masters attained enlightenment. They examined their existential circumstances and determined or came to the decision that there was enough there to practice the Dharma. there was enough freedom, enough advantages, enough endowments to practice the Dharma. Then practice it. So it may be that my death will come to me before my evil has been cleansed. How then can I be free from it? That's something to think of. What methods can I use to become free of the results of my actions? You can't go back and pluck the seeds of your actions out. No matter what kind of therapy or what kind of psychology or philosophy or religion or even Buddhism says that that's not the purpose. It's to become free of the negative effects of our negative actions. And when we die, we'll have to undergo the suffering of being separated from our body. And that's a new one. That's new. That will be new to us. If we can't sleep right now and we toss and turn in the middle of the night, you could ask yourself, gee, is this the way it's going to be when I die? This kind of uncomfortable feeling of being too, on the one level, absolutely done and exhausted, and on another level, just completely stirred up. That sounds very much like we read in the texts on dying. The process of separating mind, consciousness, and physical support. It's very, we're not used to it, and it's very, very confusing. So how will we do it? How will we purify our karma then? We won't be able to, according to the teaching. And then we'll be in the bardo, that will be in our post-mortem, or consciousness will be experiencing this post-mortem experience of all the visions and all the apparitions of the bardo, of this intermediate state. And then in the future, how can we purify our karma there? Then in the future, we'll go to some unknown place. There will be somebody's, if we're even lucky to be born as a human, we'll be under somebody's power. Somebody, our parent, or what parents, or one mother, or somebody will be, conditioning us and manipulating us again, and pushing us in all these attachment and aversion directions, giving us concepts and conditioning us. How will we be able to practice then like we could now, if we can practice now? We have these powers of purification, and this regret is the one power. The second power is the power of making a resolution. And the third power is the power of relying on, well, let's call it refuge. It's called reliance. We'll get into this. And then the fourth power is the method itself. But these are all conditions that purify karma.